Hello, everyone. So
Hi.
welcome to what is our 7th in our series of Angular London Online. And we're really excited to be introducing and welcoming Jan this week. Hi, Jan, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm very much looking forward to this.
Absolute pleasure. So if there's anyone else out there who'd like to speak, please get in touch. We'd love to have some more people on. We'll be hearing from Jan soon, and then afterwards there'll be a networking opportunity on Zoom. I've shared the details on the chat, so hopefully you'll be able to join us, and I'll share them on the screen a bit later as well. If you do have any questions, as Jan is talking, we're going to do a Q&A at the end, so please comment below, and we'll do that Q&A at the end of the session. So I don't think there's actually anything else to talk about. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jan, who's going to be talking to us about making the web a more reactive place with RxJS-Web. Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know. I honestly never thought about pronunciation.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to put your slides on now.
Perfect. Okay. I already said it, but I'm really thankful for doing this talk. It's the very first time I'm talking about RxJS-Web publicly. So if there is any feedback on the library later, on the talk itself, I'm would be very excited to hear any kind of that. So to start with the topic itself, I usually like this sentence about RxJS, because RxJS is a library for composing asynchronous and event-based programs by using observable sequences. So this is just taken from the docs website, but it already shows that RxJS is a very strong library when it comes to web programming, web development, because we are in a single-threaded environment and we're dealing with user interaction. So pretty much everything is asynchronous, and everything that is not asynchronous is event-based, more or less. And RxJS is really powerful in this particular scenario. What gives me a really hard time is when I discovered that when we're talking about web APIs that are particularly provided for web development, they are barely reactive in any way. And this was the reason why I sat down and thought about this problem and developed a library to tackle this problem. And before we start to look into this, 2 words about me. My name is Jan-Niklas Wortmann. I'm 25 years old. I'm a consultant for Evora IT. I'm a member of the RxJS Core Team since 2 years, I guess. And I'm an Angular GDE as well. Okay, back to the topic. When we talk about web APIs, I first want to give a quick overview what web APIs are actually. What am I talking about here? And to understand this, we need to consider we have ES6, which is the JavaScript specification, and we are developing JavaScript code in the end. We might do TypeScript, but that's not part of the topic. And when we're writing JavaScript, in the end, our browser is the runtime when we're not doing Node.js. Our browser is the runtime, and the browser itself comes with a V8 engine, at least Chrome and Edge and stuff like that. So they have their own engine, and this V8 engine implements the JavaScript specification ECMAScript. But on top of that, there are web APIs that are provided by the browser itself and not part of the ECMAScript specification. So for example, the DOM specification is not part of the V8 engine, but it's still part of the VG specification, I think, that is supported by modern browsers as Chrome. Well, the DOM specification is supported by pretty much every browser. But this is exactly the topic, because web APIs are not necessarily supported by all browsers, or not necessarily all browsers implement them the same way. Here is a quick overview from the MDN docs what web APIs are already. And here we also see the DOM, what I just mentioned, but also APIs like Bluetooth API, web authentication, intersection observer, stuff like that. And web APIs actually support really cool business use cases. It can make your web app way more memorable, way more interactive. So imagine Google Maps, for example, is taking your user location and is built upon this kind of information, like how to get you somewhere, where are you right now, what is nearby you. All this stuff is based on your current position. And this GeoLocation API is part of the Web API. When you start developing something with a Web API, it usually goes really well till you hit a certain point and notice it's more tricky than you thought. And there are a lot of things that make these kind of problems. Usually, Web APIs are built on this fairly easy primitive. So when your Web API is returning a single value, then it's usually a promise. If it's returning multiple values, we are working with callbacks, and this callback function is called multiple times. And this already comes with several different problems. Promises per default are asynchronous, so you always have to deal with this extra level of asynchronity, I guess. English non-native speaker, so sorry for butchering your language. And on the other hand, callbacks are just very difficult to read and to comprehend, particularly when you nest and group them. Both of them kind of like cancellation. It's getting better with abort controller for promises, but also this abort controller needs to be supported in some way. And I already mentioned it a little bit, all of them lack a certain level of composability. So it's very difficult to compose all of them and have this still in a readable and comprehensible manner. And this is a pretty good example of code that I wrote for a drag and drop implementation with supporting DOM with already existing DOM implementation. So we have add event listener, which is a web API per default. And to support cancellation here, what I have to do is storing my function references just that I can remove this kind of listener later on. And this code is already showing how complex it is to compose web APIs in the current implementation. My biggest problem with all of that is that it's not a unified interfaces. So sometimes I have to deal with callbacks, sometimes I have to deal with promises. They have their own gotchas, they have their own fallbacks and stuff like that. So for example, what I recently run into is that a promise is eagerly evaluated. So if you're just returning the value, for sure the promise is not re-executed. So you easily run into problems with those APIs. In one of Ben's blog posts, he once mentioned that an observable is a unified API that can represent a wide variety of things, events, multiple values, single values, etc., etc. And this is exactly what I want for the web API. I don't really want to care, is it now single value based, is it multiple value based, is it asynchronous, is it synchronous, whatever. Me as a developer, I don't care about this level of information. I just want to develop my business use case. And this is why I came up with RxJS-Web. It's available on GitHub, so you can check that out, give me feedback about that. And I want RxJS-Web to be an observable wrapper for web APIs. But this also means that it's lazily evaluated. For example, this is one of the things that I added to it. So that it's simulating the normal observable behavior and not necessarily the web API behavior. It is already accessible in an alpha phase. So if you want to check it out in your project, if you want to try it, you can use this with npm install RxJS-Web. And now I want to talk a little bit about the use cases, how to use it, where you can use it, stuff like that. And one example that I came up with, particularly with the GeoLocation API, is a weather app, right? So particular for all kind of PWAs, web APIs are the perfect way to go, because you can implement your PWA with having kind of like native behavior, like geolocation or access to native API. This is my perfect scenario, where I think RxJS-Web will really shine. So I implemented a very easy weather app where you can see the degrees for the current location. This is based on the GeoLocation API wrapped in RxJS-Web. So what do we have? This is more or less all the code if we ignore the functions that are executed here. So what is happening is that we're taking from position. And from position, what is from position doing internally is asking for the permission, because for web APIs, you sometimes have to perform a permission check. So it will check, does the user allow you to access his current position? And then it will return a long-living observable emitting all the position changes as well. So we can use that with SwitchMap to then go to an API, take the GPS coordinates to get the city from that. And we displayed this city in the example before in the code. And there's also in the code, I think I have the code in the slides, yes. So we can quickly go there. I will increase this a little bit. And StackBlitz is again trolling me a little bit. I created an issue for that because StackBlitz is not working well with the GeoLocation API. But let me mock this really quick. So I'm in Berlin right now. Hello. Berlin. Come on. Okay, live demonstrations are amazing. Location allow. Come on. Thanks, StackBlitz, for nothing. So I will just slightly hide this. So this is not, no one saw that. But I want to talk about the code. And if you want, you could get to the StackBlitz repository and make a +1 to the issue that I created for not supporting the GeoLocation API. I would appreciate it. Okay, what I'm doing here is first with SwitchMap getting the city by the GPS coordinates, and then go to another API to get the weather for this city, and then render it in the website, which you cannot see due to StackBlitz. But the code is shared in the slideshow, which I will also share afterwards. What I quickly want to go back to this slide, because what the GeoLocation API supports, which is not part of the usual web API, is that it supports automatic updates in form of that that it's using watch position. So every kind of position update will be emitted. It supports cancellation, which is not that trivial with callback-based API. It also supports the permission request, which usually the developer has to take care on his own. And the example that I developed does not handle error cases right now, but just because I was lazy in the example. So this is not a fault of the implementation of the web API or the implementation of RxJS-Web. It's a problem of me that I'm lazy. Again, all that code is shared in the StackBlitz. You can access it, play around with it, at least when StackBlitz decides to support geolocation properly. And another example that I liked is this Mutation Observer-based APIs. And what you can use Mutation Observer for is for skeleton loading. So if you see that here in the reloading, it's having this Slack-like animation for showing that there might be some values at some point of time. I did this with the Mutation Observer API, which is in this StackBlitz. Mutation Observer, roughly to sum this up, how this works, is pretty much when you're observing a piece of DOM, and when within this DOM, some child elements or attributes or something like that changes, you will get notified. And how I implemented this is pretty much I add 3 LE elements to request data from a backend. And as soon as I request that, I start this loading skeleton. So this is a pretty reactive approach to how to handle UI interaction and how to show loading animations. It's showing more a way what you can do with this kind of API. It's again, it's just a wrapper from the web API Mutation Observer. So if you have other examples, what you could do with the Mutation Observer API, go for it. This is one that I really liked. The last one that I want to show is, hello, okay, here we go. I label is dynamic fetching, and as a consultant, I have to work with highly sophisticated diagrams. So this is what I came up with. What I want to do is, in case of good network conditions, I want to load many items from my backend. In case of bad network connection, I want to load just a few so that the user sees something but don't have the load to load everything. Oof, English is such a difficult language. Okay, this is the code for that. It's a lot, I know that. From network is getting the current network conditions, so it's using the network API under the hood, and it's also listening to network changes. So therefore, I used first to mitigate this in this example, and then I check the network conditions. And if I'm running on 2G, then I'm just fetching the first 20 elements in my Rick and Morty API. If I'm running on everything better than 2G, I'm fetching the first 50 elements. With this way, you're reacting to the network conditions of your user that is currently using your applications to enable them to interact with the app, even though he or she just has limited network conditions. And I also use from fetch here, which technically is also a web API, if I remember correctly. But this is already part of the RxJS core. So again, you can play with this example with the StackBlitz link. Feel free to check it out. One last thing that I want to highlight here, and this might be a question that come up to you as well, is, okay, you have this cool library, but you're also working in the RxJS Core team. Why is this not part of RxJS Core? And it's a really good question. The thing is, in RxJS itself also not only supports websites and JavaScript running in the browser, but also running in Node.js. Therefore, this is one of our conditions always to consider what happens if the user uses RxJS in Node.js. And this would not at all work in Node.js. Another thing is right now, and you might notice that already, we have plenty of stuff in RxJS itself. And we rather try to limit the API surface than even broad, extended, whatever. And therefore, usually what we go with is we tend to create third-party APIs or user-land APIs, or however you want to call it. And then based on the feedback, based on the usage of that API, consider moving it into the core library. So pretty much everyone that is in the core team of RxJS has his own library with something with RxJS. So Ben has something for dealing with RxJS and async await. I think, if I remember correctly, Nicholas has RxJS spy and RxJS etc. OJ has something for test scheduler. So, and this is not my baby, RxJS-Web. I would be very excited for any kind of feedback. It's still in alpha phase because I'm a slacker and I need to write a bunch of tests. But I'm really excited if you have a demo application or you want to play around with it. I would really appreciate any kind of feedback. I plan to make a stable release this year. I just need to move my lazy ass to get this done. Anyway, that's what I want to give you on your way. Please check it out. Give me some feedback so that I can publish the API in a stable and good way that is usable. Particular, some of the APIs are really difficult to compose. So I also had a walkthrough with the sensor API, which is really reactive, right? But composing that and checking for permission and working conditionally if the permission is not working, this is really tricky if you're not using observables. So I hope this helps anyone in his or her PWA. That would be really cool. This is where I see RxJS Web to shine. and I really hope you liked this talk. If you have any feedback for me afterwards, I'm very excited for this as well. Thank you very much for coming to my quick talk. I was definitely very fast. Yeah, thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. So this is the opportunity for some questions. So if you do have any questions, please type them in the comments below. I'm obviously going to take the opportunity to ask my questions first because that's my prerogative. So you did answer how far off you were from releasing, so that's quite exciting. But what of that you showed us a whole screen of APIs. Which APIs are you looking to focus on? I'm assuming you're not doing them all. Or are you?
So let me quickly go to the GitHub repository and show you what I plan. So not all of them are very difficult to handle. So I want also to provide a benefit in using observable API. So for example, we could implement something for the vibration API, that you can vibrate your phone or something if you get a notification. But it's pretty straightforward using that with promises from my point of view. And therefore, I'm not, right now at least, I'm not considering adding this. So what we support right now is we have an open pull request for the Bluetooth API. I'm supporting dynamic imports with, dynamic imports. GeoLocation API, pretty much everything that ends with observer isn't kind of reactive already in the way it's designed. So if there's a web API that has something observer, then it should be supported. I have match media supported so that you could, in a reactive manner, establish dark and light mode. Network API, just because RxJS is really useful, particularly when we're talking about polling and HTTP related stuff. So I thought like, okay, adding something for the network API would be cool. And the permission API so that you can ask for certain browser permission, and the sensor API. The sensor API is actually the most complicated from my point of view, but it's also really cool, particularly if you're in an IoT environment, then you won't come around that. I'm never used the sensor API particular so far, so I would be, besides geolocation, which is based on that. But if someone is running in or working in an IoT environment and is using the sensor API, I would be super interested to chat about that and get some first-hand knowledge.
Cool. So we have a question.
Sure.
Considering that many parts of Angular are based on RxJS, do you think they should have a section within their documentation?
I think there is a small section about RxJS in the Angular documentation. Honestly, from my point of view, the RxJS docs should be in that good of a shape. Should, right? In that good of a shape that the Angular team just should link to the RxJS docs and see like, okay, if you want to learn about observables, just go there. But they still should talk about like their reactive forms API, HTTP client, and all that stuff that leverage observables. This is something different, but like the general introduction should be handled on the RxJS docs from my point of view. Right now, the RxJS docs could be better. So I think they are just pointing to proper points, as far as I remember. Yeah, we are working on that. But docs are hard. Like docs are really hard.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a couple of just comments. So he's also said that your English is very good. So well done for that.
Thank you.
And we've had a couple of other thank yous as well. So, but at the moment, no other questions. So obviously you were very clear. Or everyone's waiting to come to the networking to pounce on you to ask very difficult questions. So
go for it. In worst case, I just have no clue about it.
So thank you once again. It was a great talk.
Thank you.
We will be going on to Zoom straight after this, so please join us there, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And thank you very much again, Jan, for joining us.
Yeah, always. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay.